Hello, my lovely people, and welcome to Owen's Mind. And today, I would like to give my thoughts on the new movie Bloodshot. So, Bloodshot released in cinemas a little while ago. It kind of hit just as the coronavirus was kicking off. So theaters closed, they pulled the movie, they released it on streaming. So just so you know, this is going to be a spoiler review. I am going to talk lots of plot details because there's things I want to talk about in the plot which I cannot mention without spoiling something. So just be aware right now that I am going to spoil this movie if you haven't seen it. So if you do want to go and see it, go and watch it first and then come back. So Bloodshot is written by Dave Wilson and stars Vin Diesel, Guy Pearce and Isa Gonzalez. Diesel plays Ray Garrison, a soldier who returns home after a successful mission to rescue some hostages, reunites with his wife. They have a couple of nights. We get a nice little montage of them kind of enjoying each other's company. But they're then both kidnapped by a gentleman who wants to know where they got the hostage intel from. Diesel doesn't know. He's tortured, his wife is tortured and killed, and he is then killed too. Cut to him waking up in a facility run by Guy Pearce, a company called RST, and they have brought him back using nanotechnology. So he now has this nanotechnology running through his body, which allows him to heal, increases his speed and agility, and essentially makes him a super soldier. He's essentially Captain America kind of levels of, this is kind of what you're getting. And these nanobots essentially have replaced his blood. They are his entire blood supply is now these tiny little micro robots which can repair tissue damage and enhance certain systems in his body. He has no memory of who he is, really, doesn't remember his name, but he has a horrible nightmare one night where he gets flashbacks of his wife being killed and the gentleman who did it. So he goes rogue, he leaves this facility to go and hunt down this man. And this nanotechnology allows him to tap into databases and things. He figures out who the guy is and he goes and he kills him, at which point he is then shut down by RST and returned to the facility. And then we find out that this was all part of the plan, that this guy was actually a target for him and all his memories are actually implanted. So his whole memory about his wife and about the torture that they went through and them both being killed was all fraudulent. And this company essentially is, they're basically assassins, and what they do is they will create a virtual construct memory for him and they'll map a different face onto the guy who kills his wife and they give him a different name, and then they go through the same protocol. He wakes up, he gets his nanotech explained to him, he has this horrible nightmare, he goes rogue, and they go off again and they kind of, you know, try and, no, don't go, and secretly they obviously want it to go, and kill this next person. And the reason they do this is they suggest that his desire for revenge, because he loves his wife so much, gets the best out of him as a soldier. It's the strongest motivator they've got. So anybody who is a threat to RST, and Guy Pearce's character is essentially used as a target. They're imprinted onto Ray Garrison's memory. He views it, he has a nightmare, he goes up and kills them, etc, etc, etc. Now these nanobots essentially make him immortal. He can get shot, he can get blown up, and he can just beat ass everywhere he goes. So that's an overview of the plot. Eventually he comes to the realization what's happening. Somebody intervenes and kind of, you know, wakes him up to the fact what's going on, and then he tries to go back and, you know, find out exactly why this has happened to him and get the people responsible. So Dave Wilson has previously directed an episode of Love, Death and Robots on Netflix, but as far as I know, this is his only kind of feature film directing credit. He's done a bunch of video game stuff, loads of visual effects and some, you know, AAA titles and things, and it shows because a lot of this movie, particularly the action scenes, play like video games. The problem is with this movie that it's kind of forgettable. That's its biggest sin. The CGI is fine. It's very good. The problem is the action scenes, they just feel so like you've seen them before. And whereas something like Fast and Furious, which you can watch and you can enjoy, despite its ludicrous, despite the ridiculous physics, despite the fact that Dominic Toretto is essentially invincible, and they, you know, the action is ludicrous to a point where you can just get on board with it. You can enjoy it. It's one of them where you can kind of, you know, for want of a better expression, turn your brain off and just go and have a good time with it. The problem with this is it kind of plods, so you don't have that to fall back on. There's lots of the plot has got more holes than a colour, which I'm going to get through, which is why this is a spoiler video, because there are so many things in it that just don't add up. Whereas with a film that's very entertaining and just really, an enjoyable film, you can kind of skip over a few plot holes. You can just kind of go along for the ride. With this one, it just doesn't seem to have that hook. You're not particularly bothered about the characters. They're not particularly well fleshed out. So it hasn't got that to fall back on, so the plot holes become a bit more to the forefront. So I'm going to go through a few here, just in the order they kind of appear in the film, because I've got real issues with them. And yes, so it's very unclear. It's never explained when Ray, Diesel's character, actually dies, when this company, RST, actually gets hold of him, because we see this opening montage where he's rescuing a hostage. We then see him with his wife. We then see his wife tied to a chair in like a meat freezer, and each one of these different faceless, face-changing people come in and kill him. But obviously, a little bit further in the movie, we find out that's all generated. None of it happened. So we don't know at what point did he die? At what point, how did this company get hold of him? Because they say that the American military donated him. But we have no indication of when he actually died, because when he breaks his programming, essentially, and goes out and finds his wife, who is not dead, she says that she's not seen him for 5 years and she's got her own family. So it's got to be at least 5 years since he's seen her. Does that mean they've had him for 5 years? Does that mean he just didn't come home one day? Does that mean it's like I say, it's just not explained. So you never find out exactly where they got hold of him or how long he's been doing this, how many cycles he's gone through. You get an idea because you see a screen with like X'd out faces and there's 3 or 4 on there. So you think, oh, maybe they've had him that long. But then his wife says, I've not seen you for 5 years. So has he been out on missions and not come back? Was he killed in action? It's just not explained. You also get in this facility, this RST facility, there's other enhanced people. So apparently he's the top of the tree. This nanotech is the latest thing. But before that, the owner, the CEO, Guy Pearce, I can't remember the character's name, has created other enhancements for people, for ex-wounded military. So we meet a guy who is a soldier who was blind. He was blinded by, I think it's an IED. So what they do is they have, he points out that they've put cameras on him instead to act as his eye, all on his gear. So he's got them on his shoulders, he's got them on his chest, and all this kind of stuff. So Guy Pearce is very dramatic. He's like, oh, so he went from blind and now he sees, and the guy just went, everything. Like, okay, so now you see everything, but you don't really, because if you have to wear a shirt, you see nothing, because all these cameras are mounted from here down. And you're like, surely this agency is an agency of assassins, and surely at some point there's infiltration, which means you need to be out in the real world, which means you might need to wear clothes, you might need a suit on, you might need a uniform on, and all your eyesight is now on your chest, on your shoulders, and it just doesn't make any sense. Why would you do that? And the guy, he can access remote cameras and things and all this lot. And at some point he wears a helmet and it gets like a weird head-up display, and he can kind of hook into cameras and they can track people. But generally day to day, when he gestures to his chest cameras and says, this is what we mounted them on here. You're like, why put them down there? And there's a bit where he's a passenger in a car and the driver says something really snarky to him, and he kind of gives him this look. And I'm watching it thinking, you're not looking at him because your eyes don't work. You've already told us that. They should have had the things on his chest just kind of swivel. Like, it's just, oh, it's annoying. And then the female kind of, Diesel's kind of handler, she has what's called a clavicle-mounted respirator to help her breathe, and it makes her immune to inhalants. So she had something that mentioned something with esophagus or a trachea. Something happened. Damaged her throat, so surgery, so it's now mounted here on the middle of her chest. She can swim with it, which is weird because it's like an open valve. It's like a vent that kind of, as she breathes, it kind of opens on her chest. So she's not breathing here, yeah? She's now breathing through this clavicle-mounted respirator. So it's where the bottom of like a pendant would be. It's kind of, you can't really see it on the camera, but it's kind of about there. Okay, so that's how she breathes. Yeah, bear that in mind. she knows obviously what's happening to Garrison's character, and she doesn't approve. And she plays a part in the ruse where before he has the nightmare, she gets him drunk, and it's kind of, and they have a bit of a heart-to-heart and all this kind of stuff. And she's tired of having to go through it. So Guy Pearce's character, Keeper in Line, he's got a synthetic arm, but he's got like a pad on it where he can control stuff. So he can basically lock this thing on her chest and make her suffocate if he wanted to keep her compliant. The deal was apparently that for him to fix her, then okay, we can repair this, but the price is you work for us and you don't leave because you know too much. Okay, so again, doesn't breathe through her mouth, breathes through this thing in her chest. So he closes it because she's trying to defy him and walk out the room, and he just goes zip, and this thing goes jump, and that's it. And now she's suffocating, and so she collapses against the wall, and he's kind of like, "We have an understanding," and she's like, "Yeah." So he turns it back on, and you get this massive. She inhales this massive gasp of air, and she's like, and I'm like, nothing above there works. Why are you doing that? What you should get is the vent should go. You should get like a massive influx of air, because this is what she's breathing through, but what you get is her sort of sucking it in through her mouth, and you're like, that doesn't work because you don't breathe through there. You've already told us you breathe through your chest. So when she gets a chance to take this massive influx of air, she goes, and you're like, no, it should be through there. And again, it's very hard to, probably as an actress, it's quite hard to, or it would be quite hard to show that, her relief, without that kind of action. It's again like the guy in the thing giving the kind of stink eye to the guy next to him, even though he can't see. It's just weird like that. And those things, maybe I'm just a bit picky, but it kind of goes off. When Diesel, again, sorry, I'm picking this movie apart, okay, but I will get to the end and I will throw it some props, so don't worry. But just at the minute, these just things bug me, and they might bug you, they might not, but there you go. When he goes rogue for the first time, he steals a Jeep and gets to a little airstrip, and he finds a Gulfstream jet, and he goes into the Gulfstream, and they're tracking him so they can kind of see where he is, and they're like, do you know how to fly that? And he goes, not yet. And then you see his nanobots kind of hitting the internet, and he downloads a user manual for the Gulfstream. Next thing, he's flying through the air absolutely beautifully, perfectly. Here's what I know. I could read a book cover to cover on heart surgery. I couldn't then go and do it. Having the knowledge is different from having the execution. And he's just like, he reads a book on flying a plane, and now he flies a plane. And you're like, in The Matrix, when Trinity does it for the helicopter, it's a program in your brain, so it kind of programs the motor functions as well. This is just him reading. His brain just kind of downloads the manual. It's like, oh, I can fly a plane now. It's like, no, you can't. It's a different thing. And we're told that these nanites are simply his blood. They're in his blood, and yet all of a sudden they can do other things too. So you could argue, oh well, now that they're in his blood, they can control his motor function. It's just weird. The nanite technology itself, when it's demonstrated to him for the first time, he wakes up on a table in a lab, and Guy Pearce is like, you're disorientated. This is what's gone on. And he gets a scalpel and slashes the palm of his hand. And he's like, "Geez, Doc, what do you do that for?" And he goes, "Look," and then you see the wound, all the blood spreading out. It's kind of grey because of these nanite things, and it starts to crawl back together. And he puts it under this little screen, and you see, like a microscope, and you see all these tiny little nanite robots. And he stitches his hand back together. To stitch that one cut in his hand, it takes a good minute and a half, 2 minutes of screen time. So it's like, yeah, it heals, and it heals exceptionally fast, but about a minute and a half. You'll see it sewing this little thing back together in his hand, and all the layers of tissue, and the camera kind of comes up out of his hand, and you see the tissue getting knitted back together by all these tiny little robots. Okay, good. So that's fair enough. And then you cut to later in the movie, and he is getting blown to bits. There's a bit where he has like a shotgun blast to the face, and his face and half his head just disappears. And then these nanites kind of crawl back, and you're like, you wouldn't survive that. You can't survive that for seconds. So and at this point, the nanites seem to work a lot quicker. All of a sudden, they can. So the tiny, very crisp, clean wound on his hand takes a minute and a half, but bullet holes and explosions, they can knit him back together in seconds. And you're like, okay, so if you get your head blown off, you're still dead. If they then put your head back together, you're dead in an instant. You can't survive for the minute and a half it takes, or even the 10 seconds it takes for these things to stitch your head back together. So things like that. And at the very end, he gets blown up with a grenade. At this point, he has no nanic technology. It's got like a counter on it because it runs out. It requires energy, and they run down. And every time he does a new mission, they flood him with new ones. At this point, his last gasp. He's used all his healing regenerative powers to get the bad guy. He's got 0%. So none of these things are in his system. He's just a regular dude like you or me. He gets blown up with a grenade, and this explosion is vast. It's massive, and you're like, okay. Cut to black, come back, and he's laid on a table. He's fine. One of his allies has brought him back, and you're like, you would have had to scrape him up with a dustpan and brush to put him back together. He would have been everywhere. And again, it's just kind of skipped over. It's just, and again, I feel like I'm being really overcritical, but because it's not as entertaining to me as a Fast and Furious, you can't push them things aside. You know, Endgame, which I love, had plot holes. People have pointed them out, but you can ignore them because the spectacle, the characters you care about, you can go along with it. But here, because it's not as engaging, and you don't really get the history of the characters, and you find out his life is all a lie, and you're not really given a lot of time to care about them or why you should care about them, because you care about him getting revenge for his wife. But as soon as that becomes a point where it's like, well, that's not real, his motives aren't real, so like I say, you can't push these things aside as much. But yeah, like I say, the problem with the movie for me, the biggest thing about it is it's forgettable. I had to make notes watching it because I just didn't remember it back, and I'm apart from the things I've mentioned, there's very little else in the movie that I can go back to. Some of the CGI is good, some of it's quite kind of ragdoll, kind of rubbery. There's a scene where they're falling down a lift shaft, and again, it's very kind of, it's CGI heavy. How you would have done that any other way, practically, I don't know. So it had to be CGI, but it just, yeah, it's just a shame because it had potential. And from what I understand, the comics are very well liked and very well loved, and I think they were planning at least 2 or a trilogy of these, and it was going to join a part of a bigger universe. I don't know if it will now because it didn't do overly well. Now again, some of that could be down to the theatres closing, but yeah. So I can't even say it's a good time to turn your brain off, because you would really have to turn your brain off. From my perspective now, as I will say, I've never made a movie, and making a good movie is exceptionally hard. There is thousands of movies made every year, and only the top maybe 10% get the kind of big box office, and a lot of them fade away, and some of them don't even get released because they go straight to video. So it is hard to do, and I'm not bagging on anybody in the movie. Everyone kind of serves their purpose. It's just not a good movie. But yeah, if you love it, please love it. I'm not saying for a second that if you enjoy this movie, you're wrong. You're not at all, because everybody likes movies. I did a video the other day where I defended the Cats movie, and everybody hates that, but I saw some value in it. So if you see value in this, brilliant. I'm not going to tell you wrong, because you're not. Everybody likes what they like, but for me, it just didn't connect with me. It's not something I'll go back to. I don't feel like I wasted my time watching it, but it's not one I'll go back to. So anyway, those are my thoughts, guys. Let me know yours in the comments, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.